You're standing at the edge of a camp in Ice Age Europe. 20,000 years ago, a woman here hasn't bled in 3 months. There's no test, no clinic, no doctor with a clipboard. So what did ancient humans do when someone got pregnant? They did the one thing almost no other animal on this planet does. They gathered around her. Watch a monkey give birth and you'll see the exact opposite. She wanders away from the group, often at night, and delivers alone. She reaches down, pulls the infant up to her chest, and cleans its face. Nobody helps her, because nobody needs to. A human mother can't pull that off. Karen Rosenberg and Wenda Trevathan, two anthropologists, spent decades working out why human babies come out facing backwards. The back of the skull points toward the mother's belly, so the baby's face aims at her spine. Reach down to guide your own child out, and you're bending its neck the wrong way. So you don't reach down, you ask for hands. Trevathan laid this out in her 1987 book on the evolution of human birth. Midwifery might be the oldest job description our species has, older than farming, older than the wheel, by a very long stretch. Somebody's grandmother was catching babies before anybody planted a seed. How far back does that crowd around her actually go? Timothy Weaver and Jean-Jacques Heblin went looking, using a Neanderthal pelvis from Tabun Cave in Israel. They rebuilt it in 2009 and ran a newborn Neanderthal skull through the reconstruction. The fit was tight, the head was large, and the shoulders were wide. Their model says the Neanderthal baby probably didn't corkscrew through the way ours does. Different species, different route, same brutal squeeze. Whatever goes wrong in a human birth canal was going wrong before our species existed. Here's the thing, nobody tells you about human birth. It isn't slightly harder than other primate births. It's the hardest birth in the entire primate order, and it isn't close. A chimpanzee's newborn slips through her pelvis with room to spare. A human newborn's head clears its mother's pelvic opening by a few millimeters. That's the tolerance of a badly fitted door. For 50 years, the standard explanation was walking. Sherwood Washburn named it the obstetrical dilemma back in 1960. Standing upright reshaped the pelvis into a narrow bowl for balance. Then brains got bigger anyway. Two demands, one piece of anatomy, and the baby caught in the middle. The compromise, Washburn said, was to evict the baby early before its head grew too large. Which is why a newborn human is so useless. A foal walks within an hour, a baby takes a year, and complains the whole time. Then Holly Dunsworth tested the actual physics of it. Her 2012 study measured how much extra energy women burn when their hips are wider. The answer was almost none. Anna Warner put people on treadmills and found no meaningful walking penalty for a wider pelvis. Evolution could have built a roomier birth canal and lost nothing on the walk. So the door was never the problem. Dunsworth's argument is that the mother's metabolism sets the deadline. Around the 9th month, a fetus starts demanding more energy than a woman's body can keep supplying. She's already running at roughly twice her resting rate, which is close to the human ceiling. Birth happens when the mother runs out of fuel, not when the baby runs out of room. That debate is still live, and both camps have good data, but it reframes the whole thing. Pregnancy in the ancient world was a 9-month energy crisis with a hard deadline, which raises a practical problem for our woman in the camp. How does she even know she's pregnant? Missed periods sound like an obvious signal, and they mostly weren't. Beverly Strassman spent years tracking menstrual cycles among Dogon women in Mali. She counted around 110 periods across an entire lifetime. A woman in a modern city has closer to 400. Between long breastfeeding, hard physical work, and lean bodies, cycles were rare and irregular. Missing one told you very little. So for most of human history, the answer was patience. You waited until her body made it obvious. Then the Egyptians did something clever. The Berlin Medical Papyrus, written around 1350 BC, gives an actual pregnancy test. You take barley and emmer wheat, put them in cloth bags, and the woman urinates on them daily. If the barley sprouts first, the papyrus says she's carrying a boy. If the emmer sprouts first, a girl. If nothing grows at all, she isn't pregnant. In 1963, a team of Egyptian researchers led by Paul Galliongui decided to check. They published the results in the journal Medical History. The grain sprouted for pregnant women roughly 70% of the time. It never sprouted for men. Elevated hormones in pregnant urine seem to give the seeds a push. 3,300 years ago, someone in Egypt built a working biological test out of barley. They were wrong about the boy and girl part, which came out to pure coin flip. But the test itself worked, and nobody in Europe matched it until the 1920s. There's another clue, and it's far older than Egypt. Some of the first images humans ever carved of themselves are pregnant bodies. The Venus of Willendorf is around 30,000 years old, heavy-bellied and full-breasted. For a century, archaeologists called these fertility idols, which is a polite way of saying nobody knew. Then, Leroy McDermott published a strange idea in 1996. He noticed the proportions are distorted in one consistent direction. The belly and breasts are enormous, the feet shrink to nothing, and the head has no face. That's the exact view a pregnant woman gets looking down at her own body. McDermott's argument is that a pregnant woman carved it herself, a self-portrait in mammoth ivory. Plenty of archaeologists disagree, and that debate never closed. But somebody thought a pregnant body was worth carving in stone over and over for 20,000 years. So she's pregnant, and everyone knows. Does she stop working? No. Frank Marlowe followed Hadza women in Tanzania for years, and pregnant women kept foraging. They dug tubers, gathered berries, and walked the same distances as everybody else. There was no maternity leave because the calories didn't arrive on their own. The camp needed her hands right up until it needed her lying down. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Hunter-gatherer women had far fewer babies than you'd expect. Nancy Howell's demographic work on Kalahari foragers found births spaced about 4 years apart. Nobody planned that. Constant on-demand nursing suppresses ovulation, and a woman carrying a toddler 8 kilometers a day stays lean. Biology handled the spacing for them. Then farming arrived, and the spacing collapsed. Grain porridge meant babies could be weaned early. Settled villages meant mothers weren't carrying toddlers across a landscape. Neolithic birth intervals dropped toward 2 years in the skeletal record. Twice the babies, half the gap, and a population curve that never came back down. Most of the population growth that follows starts with what babies were fed. Now the birth itself, forget the image of a woman flat on her back. George Engelman, an obstetrician, surveyed birth positions across dozens of societies in 1882. Squatting, kneeling, sitting, standing, hanging from a rope or a branch. Upright, over and over again on nearly every continent. Gravity is free, and everybody except modern hospitals seems to have noticed. Egypt left us the physical proof. In 2001, Josef Wegner was excavating a house at Abydos with a team from Pennsylvania. He found a painted mud brick, roughly 3,700 years old. It's a birth brick. Egyptian women squatted on 2 of them, one under each foot, with the space between as the delivery gap. The painting shows a mother holding her newborn, flanked by attendants and protective figures. It's the only one ever found. The Egyptian hieroglyph for birth is a woman with the infant's head and arms already emerging. It's a crouching woman, hair loose, knees bent. Now for the part nobody enjoys. Some of them died. Estimates from pre-industrial records put maternal deaths somewhere around 1 to 2% per birth. That sounds survivable until you multiply it by 6 or 7 births. It stops sounding survivable pretty fast. Rome wrote its answer to that into law. A rule from the early republic required cutting open any woman who died late in pregnancy. The point was the infant and the burial code, and not the mother who was already gone. That law is where the word cesarean comes from. Julius Caesar wasn't born that way. Incidentally, his mother Aurelia lived for decades afterwards, which was not survivable surgery in the 1st century BC. In 1991, archaeologists excavating a cave near Ostuni in southern Italy found a burial. The woman was about 20 years old, and she died around 28,000 years ago. Inside her pelvis were the bones of a full-term fetus. She died in labor or close to it. But look at how they buried her. Her head rested on a pillow of stones covered in red ochre. She wore a headdress of hundreds of perforated shells. Her right hand was folded across her abdomen over the child that never arrived. Somebody arranged that hand 28,000 years ago. Somebody stood over a dead young woman and placed her palm on her belly. That's grief, with a burial ritual built around it. Say the birth goes well. The strangest part of the story comes next. The mother doesn't keep the baby to herself. Sarah Hurdy spent a career arguing that humans are cooperative breeders. We're the only ape that hands its newborn to other people. A chimpanzee mother will not let another chimp hold her infant for months. Try that with a human baby at a family gathering. You'll lose it to an ant within 90 seconds. Edward Tronick studied the EFE people of the Ituri rainforest and counted the handovers. An EFE camp passed a newborn between 14 different people on average in its first days. Other women in the camp nursed them, not as a favor, not as an emergency measure, but as the ordinary way infants get raised. The pregnancy stopped being hers alone the moment somebody noticed. It became a project with staff, and the staff included people you might not expect. Kristen Hawkes watched Hadza foragers and noticed the old women outworking everyone. Grandmothers dug tubers for hours and handed almost all of it to their grandchildren. Her grandmother hypothesis, published in 1997, makes an odd claim. Human women live decades past fertility because those extra decades feed the next generation. Hawkes reads menopause as a switch from making children to keeping them alive. One more thing, because it complicates the picture. Not every pregnancy was wanted, and ancient people did something about that too. Cyrannus of Ephesus, a Greek physician working in Rome around the 2nd century, wrote a gynecology manual. He separates preventing conception from ending a pregnancy and lists methods for both. He also warns his readers off the more violent techniques, which tells you those were circulating. The strangest case is silphium, a plant from the North African city of Cyrene. Rome imported it by the shipload as a contraceptive and put it on the local coins. It went extinct. Pliny the Elder wrote that the last surviving stalk was sent to the Emperor Nero as a curiosity. Humanity harvested a species out of existence to avoid getting pregnant and then wrote it down. The historian John Riddle tracked these plants through ancient texts, and some hold up under testing. Wild carrot seed, one of the recurring ones, does show anti-fertility effects in laboratory rodents. So go back to that camp. The woman who hasn't bled in 3 months, she'll keep foraging for another 6 months because the group needs the calories. Her mother and her sisters will be there when the contractions start because she physically cannot do this alone. She'll squat, not lie down, and within an hour of the birth, half the camp will have held her child. Every one of those things is still happening somewhere tonight. The hands, the crouch, the crowd of relatives who won't hand the baby back. We built hospitals and monitors and epidurals on top of it all. But underneath, the arrangement hasn't changed since the Ice Age. Every human ever born arrived in someone else's hands.